last week and this week, we want to talk about the vision of Saint Augustine's. And we want to do that because, it's super important for all of us in the room, but particularly if you're new, this is a great moment because you're kind of going to get, what is this place about and where are we going to? You're going to get that today. So it's a wonderful moment to hear all that just in one fell swoop. It's also, as we talk about vision, we always connect that to finance as well. And so only a couple of times a year do we talk about vision and finance together. We don't want to bang on about it, but it's an important part of how things work and who we are. So I'm going to speak for a bit, and then there's going to be an opportunity to respond, to go like, hey, God, what are you calling me to do? What am I calling me to do in terms of a range of actions? Not least, what does this mean in terms of finance? So that's where this talk is going. Now, last week we spoke about this sense of actually God wanting us to build capacity for a coming season where God is actually pouring out his presence in life, not just in us, for us gathered here, but for many other people who don't know him, and we want to be prepared to capture all of that and all that God has for us. So we spoke about the absolute need to build capacity for that because we don't want to miss it. Building capacity in the life of the church, or just really anything in the life of the church and life generally, is actually a partnership between ourselves and God. And I just want to say that to us really as plainly as I possibly can. When we just sit back, God doesn't just do the stuff for us. But it's not just about us doing the work either. It really is a partnership of what God is doing in the world and how the church can respond appropriately to that. It's about what God's doing in the world and how we can respond to that as business leaders or employers or as students or as employees, right? Where it's always about a partnership. This is the way that God has created human beings. This is the way that God has set up the world. And so the very best thing one can do is actually get with a program. That's just what I'm saying. Is that cool? Don't try to find yourself working against God in this regard. And today I want to follow this theme on just a little bit more. And I'm wanting to be using a story from the Old Testament that helps us understand, maybe this moment and actually draw some principles from that so that we can think really clearly about what we should do next. And one of the things that we thought about when we thought about building capacity is actually the need to create a number of spaces where, whether you're either a firstborn or getting your first job, there can be a space where, you can actually get to know God more just outside of what we're doing here on Sunday. And why is that important? Well, that's important because what we're seeing in the data is that in 2018, there was only 4% of people people in the age range between 18 to 24, only 4% of them were in church. But what we're seeing in 2025 is that now is up at 16%. Right? There is a real bump there. So the best thing to do is actually be thinking about how do we build capacity to capture that, to look after that, to nurture that, and to grow that. And so what I want to do today is, in a similar way, think about this passage I'm going to read to you. Think about, gosh, what is the moment we're in? What principles can we gain from looking at this passage so that we can respond with real courage and faith and a sense of God's call and what we're all doing here. So let me read this passage to you. The context here is, again, this is a very early part of the Bible. And the prophet Elijah has been sent to speak to this king called Ahab. Now, Ahab, in the Bible, when we talk about things being bad, in the world today, right? Things are bad, and then they're bad on a biblical level, right? It's like COVID, it feels like the plague. Well, Ahab in the Bible is considered the worst king of all in the Bible, right? So that's like 10 out of 10 bad. It's really bad. And so he's a bad guy. And prophets weren't known to have a great kind of rep with kings. Often they were killed for saying the wrong thing and not giving the king great PR. You suddenly found yourself out of a job or released of your head. Usually was the case. So Elijah is called to go and see the king, and he's called to see the king because at this period of time, Israel has been experiencing a 3.5-year drought. right? And if you're living in a desert, it's you actually need the yearly rains and get whatever water you can possibly have. So 3 years of nothing is a real crisis, right? That is an extreme crisis. And so Elijah goes and sees King Ahab, and this is where we get into it. And Elijah said to Ahab, "Go, eat and drink, for there is the sound of a heavy rain." So Ahab went off to eat and drink, but Elijah climbed to the top of the top of Carmel, bent down to the ground and put his face between his knees. "Go and look towards the sea," he told his servant. And he went up and he looked. "There is nothing there," he said. 7 times Elijah said, "Go back." The 7th time the servant reported, "A cloud as small as a person's hand is rising from the sea." So Elijah said, "Go and tell Ahab, hitch up your chariot and go down before the rain stops you." Meanwhile, the sky grew black with clouds, the wind rose, a heavy rain started falling, and Ahab rode off to Jezreel. The power of the Lord came on Elijah, and tucking his cloak into his belt, he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. There's a number of things I want to bring out of this little story. And the first thing is the way that expectations actually shapes behavior. What we expect to happen actually shapes, what we do. Elijah heard the sound of heavy rain. He was spoken to by God saying, there is actually going to be, this drought is going to break. And because that he heard that and he believed it, he had an expectation that actually God was going to deliver on that, he went up Mount Carmel. Now this is where we are geographically. As Mount Carmel is by the sea, it's like a sea cliff. If we saw the mountains today, we'd say it's just a large hill, to be absolutely honest. It's actually not that big. So you'd climb up there and you would look towards the southeast and you'd be looking into the Mediterranean Sea. That's where the weather comes from. And so facing the expectation that actually God was going to deliver on what God had said, he climbs up the mountain and he begins to pray. Can you see the way the expectation shapes behavior? He actually didn't just wait and do nothing. He actually did something. He went up the mountain and he began to pray. And I just want to say that, it's interesting here because there's a real connection from how do we form our expectations correctly. Now, often it's the case we think about what happened last year or the quarter before, for example, right? We have a look at the cash flow. We have a look at, with the productivity of what, X, Y, and Z is happening. We think about our school grades. We think about, all the things, right? We look back actually at what has been happening, and that becomes the data we often use towards shaping our expectations. And that's the right thing to do, right? God is not honored by us kind of shutting our kind of eyes to data or shutting our eyes to trends. That's not the way to honor God in the world. But do you know what? Interestingly, what also honors God is actually listening to what God is saying, because in this instance, God is bringing something into the future, and that is the thing that should shape actually that's the thing that shapes Elijah's expectation. So what you're not hearing from me here is counsel to just go start flying blind into anything, right? Absolutely not. But what I am saying is, our expectations shape behavior. And what's shaping our expectations? Where are we getting that data from? And what I'm saying this morning is often, in church context, and business context, and schools, and life, we can't just look at what's happened before. That's important. What we have to think about also is be open to what God is saying to us and wants to bring into our future. Is this making sense? Yeah, you're with me on here. Now, of course, there's no guarantees and all that, all the things, right? I completely understand that. What I'm saying is one of the most important things we can do in our life is actually be thinking about, hey, what is God also saying here? And I think that's for us, not just as a church, but all for us kind of as people who own businesses, people who employ people who are employees, school, all the things, right? All the things in life. This is a personal thing as well as just like on a church-wide thing. we're not just shaped by our past. Actually, God's calling each one of us into a future. And that future is unfolding, right? It may be linked to the past, there may be some connection there, but often, it can be something completely new, right? I just want to say this morning, just be encouraged or just be open to the reality that God speaks to us, God wants to shape our lives, and in fact, God often wants to bring new things into our lives that actually are disconnected from our past, and I just want us to be open to that reality. In the same way, if Ahab thought, gosh, okay, I'm going to go up on the hill, I'm going to be thinking, it's going to... Now, let's think, how did it go last quarter in terms of rainfall? Right? When you've had 3 years of nothing, right? It doesn't work when you just think, like, what was last quarter? What was the year before? How's it going, right? We've got to be open to a future. And I just think, just in terms of like God speaking into our lives and calling and the way that shapes our expectation. Saint Augustine's was planted. We got going in 2016. We ran a few services just to see, if we still kind of had it in us, really. And we got really planted in 2017 and really got going. But interestingly, even on the first couple of services, we were trialing just a couple of things out. There was a deep sense of actually what God was calling us to was not just having a flourishing church ministry. That's absolutely true. But also God was calling us to a flourishing church ministry, to be training people actually for doing and theological education and training people for church leadership. And the third thing was that we'd be a part of actually revitalizing other churches, either by just kind of revitalizing them or, in fact, church planting. And these three things, these three elements of the calling on Saint Augustine is something that has shaped our behavior and what we've done, our strategy, our expectation, and what we've put money towards. And that continues for us today. The things we're going for are that we would, would have a flourishing church ministry, right? And it's wonderful that we've got now all the spaces from firstborn to first job, right? We've got like kids spaces, home groups, youth groups, now young adults group, amazing. And we've got Alpha, and we're going to hear a bit more about that. And we want to get on to some of the other things as well. We want to think about, what do we mean about training other leaders? And we're going to be getting into also, what does it mean to be revitalizing other spaces? So this is what I want to talk a little bit more about today. But I've got to say, when we first got started in 2016, or 2016, 2017, it's all a bit of a blur. When we got going and we looked out on the horizon to see, what kind of data there was around, this is what The Guardian had to say to us. People of no religion outnumber Christians in England and Wales, according to one study. And of course, that's not great news, is it? As you go out on the first day, you think, gosh, what's out there in the kind of, how's the church atmosphere looking? So this is what The Guardian has to say. And then this is followed up by our own stats. According to Stats NZ, in 2019, more than 2 million New Zealanders say they have no religions. That's according to our census, with the headline being losing our religion. Like Ahab's servant, we kind of would sit on the hill. We had a look at it and said, is there anything coming? And the answer was, not much, right? Not great news. But it's interesting, for Ahab's servant, it was not on day one. Sure, he returned with not, much positive to say. But then then Elijah sent his servant out again on the second day. Get out there, he said, in a relaxed and unhurried way, and have a look onto the horizon. And on the second day, his servant went out and he looked on the horizon and he saw nothing. So he had to report back to Elijah with, again, less than positive news. And this news is somewhat reflected in these next newspaper headlines. Time magazine in 2021, they said fewer than half of American adults now belong to a house of worship. And that was the first time in 80 years that this is the case for the US. The first time in 80 years, right? This is, again, less than positive news out there in the kind of religious church spirituality atmosphere. Not much to report in terms of positivity. Yet on the third day and the fourth day and the fifth day, Ahab sent his servant out on the hill to have a look at the horizon. And on all those days, he went and he looked. And at this point, this is where, the great value of grit and determination and perseverance is really kicking in, right? On day 5, when you look out and there is nothing to report back. And in a not dissimilar way as well, when we hit 2022, we've got these reports, again, from our friends at the BBC. Reporting back in 2022 on the 2021 census, they said less than half of England and Wales populations are now Christians. And then Cheerful Charlie, The Guardian, they had this to say, Christianity now a minority religion in England and Wales. It's not really going great, is it, to be honest, right? Not much positive news to report. Yet on the 7th day, Elijah sent his servant out again, right? This time he's doing it sheerly for the memes, right? I'm doing it because, I don't know, I'm doing it because I'm doing it. I'm doing it because I'm a servant, right? And he's heading out there. And yet on the 7th day, what he sees as he looks out on the horizon is a cloud, a very, very small cloud, a cloud the size of a person's hand off on the horizon. And then he comes back and reports to Elijah, I see a cloud the size of a person's hand. And interestingly, as we kind of launched into 2025, this is where I feel that we are actually at as a church as well. Let's have a look at these set of headlines. So in France, in the turn kind of we head into April, this is in France. Okay, so adult Catholic baptisms double in 2 years. See all those lights around the castle? That's people getting ready to be baptized, right? It's a huge amount of people, right? 10,000 people getting ready to be baptized. There's a big kind of shifts beginning to happen. And, what's our next one? I've forgotten who's next. The Economist, not known for its exaggeration, The Economist, a secular magazine talking about economics, reports this. The West has stopped losing its religion. This is economic data showing us a real shift. A cloud the size of a person's hand is on the horizon. What's our next one? Even in a good old St. Patrick's Cathedral in Auckland, to conduct 350 baptisms on Easter Sunday, says Peter Lyman, and that's on the 20th of April. There was more baptisms in that day than they had done for a whole year. Let's go to the next. The BBC, hundreds gather, this is in July, thank goodness it's warm, hundreds gather for mass baptisms in the Seine. This is in Bournemouth. And you can see this is a real surprise. And here's the interesting contrast. Who can remember what The Guardian was saying in 2016? Good news or bad news? Bad news. I didn't really ask you to really remember it. It was not great news, right? And here's what they had to say in April of this year. Revival is happening. Church house resurgence amongst young in the UK. This is newspaper reportage, right? This is not the kind of data that you get from those who are already convinced. This is basically what is happening this year. And lots of this was coming to the fore as we were having these discussions. I was in the UK in July, and we had 8,500 people gathered at a church camp. 8,500. At the New Wine Church camp, they had 16,000, right? Where there's a cloud the size of a person's hand on the horizon. And we've got to recognize this is the moment we're actually in and be prepared to respond to that and to be open to all that God is doing. And one of the ways we're thinking about what does it mean to respond to the reality that actually God is drawing and bringing people to God's self is one of the ways we've responded to that is by running Alpha. And last week we heard from Kristen, and this week we're going to hear from her again because there's another amazing story from Alpha. And so I'd like for you to give Kristen a round of applause as she comes.
Oh man, that was giving me like shivers on my arms, those stats and everything exciting that's happening in the church. It's pretty cool. So behind me are a few photos of Alpha. And we have been running the very first Alpha at Saint Augustine's over 7 weeks. We've had great conversation, delicious food, and it has been truly a 2025 highlight. It has exceeded my expectations, and we have had the most incredible team carrying us through that. So thank you to everyone who was involved and also everyone who came. Last week I interviewed Solveig, which was beautiful. If you didn't hear it, I would highly recommend listening to the podcast and hearing her testimony about Alpha. And this week I've got someone that I've got to know him and his amazing wife, Alan and Jill. They are an incredible couple, and they came along to Alpha. I didn't know them before they came to Alpha, and getting to know them has been such a delight. But I thought it would be great if, Alan, you want to come and join me on the stage, and let's put our hands together for Alan as he shares about Alpha.
Thank you.
So, Alpha. Yeah, Alan, what can you tell us about? Well, first of all, it'd be cool if you just tell us a bit about yourself, people that don't know you, and also why it was important to you to invite others to Alpha.
Hi, my name's Alan. My wife Jill and I have been coming to St Augustine's for maybe a couple of years now, and we've just really valued the experience. We've had we've met some of you, which is really nice. I'd like to meet some more. I grew up in a Christian home, which on one hand sounds a little boring, but then it's such a privilege and such a blessing to actually have that sort of in your belt. So it's really cool. Now, when I saw the slides come up on the screen, a couple of months ago around we are running Alpha at St Augustine's, it really struck me that it was, who's the we here? And I figured that actually we was, that's me, I think. And I just really felt that it was part of something I need to be doing if I was actually part of this group at all. So that was really important to me. And then I guess the second thing is that I realized that we all know people who are in our office that we walk alongside, that we care about, that we're somehow a little bit called to in some sort of strange way that could really use a little bit of Jesus in their lives. So I decided I needed to respond to that.
That's awesome. So how did you invite guests along to Alpha? Obviously you came with people, and I'd love to hear more about,
So Jill and I actually have, through a long and somewhat complicated story, been associated with 3 girls, 3 triplet sisters, for a long time since they were tiny, and they've just really been a part of our life. And they're beautiful young ladies now, and while we had actually read them Bible stories sitting on our knee, after dinner and so forth, but a walk with Jesus is something that is different and wasn't really a part of their life. So I just felt it was really important to, just invite them. And so how do I invite them? Well, I just said, hey girls, what are you doing on Tuesday nights in September? Or Wednesday nights in September, I'm sorry. So, and guess what? They said, oh, sure, no problem. That's great. So it was easy. I think it's actually a lot easier now than I felt it used to be in inviting people, or I'm talking about my faith. If you're sitting in the lunchroom and somebody says to you, oh, I'm a Buddhist, or I'm a Muslim person, you don't go, oh my gosh. You actually go, okay, fine. If they say, I'm going to the temple to have Diwali this morning, because there's a lot of our Indian community who are, you aren't really that shocked. Or if somebody says, I'm into crystals, you might go, well, I don't kind of get that, but you don't go, it's not really weird. So I think in many contexts in New Zealand, if you say, I'm going to church on Sunday, or I'm a Christian, people don't actually think you're really, really weird.
That's right. Yeah.
And so I just think it's just a lot easier now to actually do that and be who you are in your faith.
That's great. So the people that you invited, the triplets, what was it like watching them experience Alpha?
Going to Alpha was really great. Not just, I mean, it was a great experience, and there was a few surprises along the way, I think. Some of the surprises, I think I was really surprised at the level of interesting, deeply honest conversation that people are actually prepared to have. And then I was really loved the sort of integrity of the answers. And, you know, some of the integrity goes to, oh, I actually haven't thought about that, or actually I don't know. And I think that's lovely to be able to discover all those sorts of things as we go. So what else surprising? The sort of the environment that was set up around Alpha by the team was really lovely. It was not at all weird for people coming in. They weren't set upon by a bunch of Christian zealots, you know, that sort of made them embarrassed or anything like that. It was really good. And for the girls, I mean, I think that what surprised me in some ways is that, and other people, you know, while we live in a Christian nation, there's a lot of people who don't know the sort of basics of the gospel that we actually grow up with and think is just part of the tenets, the rock solid pieces of our faith. And so that was really good to unpack some of that. I mean, at one stage, one of them said, so, are you telling me that Jesus died and then came back to life? Wow. And I thought, gosh, that's just something that I have always taken to be part of who we are and what we do and so forth. So it was really lovely to be able to unpack some of those really basic sorts of things as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. And what would you say to someone who's thinking about coming to Alpha, maybe in a similar position, you know, responding to the we and also inviting a friend?
I think it's pretty easy. You know, honestly, it's just a matter of if you're walking beside somebody, it's very easy just to ask and just to you know, just in some ways, it's so easy to say, hey, why don't you hang out with me and we'll go to Alpha on Wednesday? You know, and people will likely say yes. It's not a problem. It's not weird.
Yeah, absolutely. One beautiful thing that I noticed what you and Jill did, you actually had dinner with your guests before Alpha. So you'd have dinner together and then walk on into Alpha, and it was just this, like, lovely to see such an investment to you coming with your guests, but not only coming, actually having a meal with them before. So yeah, it was really beautiful.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing. And why don't we give it up for Alan? So if you're here last week and then heard that this morning, you'll know that Alpha is literally changing lives. It's a beautiful space and it's pretty exciting. And the one thing about Alpha is definitely not a side project or something separate to what we do here. It is very much a part of Saint Augustine's, and we are all very much a part of that, which is just so great. And I just loved hearing from you, Alan, and the fact that, you know, you invited people and you came with them. It's such a sacrifice to do that over 7 weeks, and it literally changed lives. So good. I also just want to let you know that Alpha has gone so well that we are going to be running 2 next year. The first one starting on February 18 and another one later in the year. And I know I harp on about it a lot, but I truly believe in Alpha and the impact it's having. It's been a really, really beautiful space. I also just really, I love the fact we were chatting during the week, Alan and I, and he mentioned something and said, it's not until you have to say your beliefs out loud you realize what you believe, and having that open environment and being around people that know nothing about faith, that's something that really has been a beautiful thing to capture, is when we say our beliefs out loud, we have to own those, and we realize, actually, I don't think I've ever given words to that. So Alpha is a space for everyone, wherever you are on the journey. So before I hand back to Newt, I just want to say, if you want to be involved in Alpha, if you want to know more about it, please come and talk to me, because I love talking about it, and also I would just love for you to be a part of it. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to Alan and Jill as well. Thank you. That's been absolutely wonderful. I want to head back to our little this little story in the Bible again. As we think about Elijah, we're thinking about the servant. We're thinking about there's a cloud on the horizon. It's the size of a person's hand. Because I want to draw your attention to this one word. And it really captured me as I thought about the moment we're in. And how the story connects to that moment. And it's really interesting, this, after the seventh time, the cloud as small as a person's hand is rising from the sea. And then it says this word, meanwhile, the sky grew black with clouds and the wind rose and a heavy rain started to fall. And I really thought this word, meanwhile, is such an important word. Right, the word meanwhile is a word that it's like the time that exists between the start of something happening and, what's going to happen next. It's such an important time, the time in between. You see something off on the horizon, you see something happening, but it actually hasn't fully happened yet. And so the space is called, that is meanwhile, right? But what's interesting in the space of meanwhile, it wasn't actually doing nothing. It wasn't a space where we did, or where Elisha did nothing. It's actually a space of activity. It's a space of we need to get some things done. There's a cloud the size of a person's hand coming, and we know what that's going to mean. It's going to start pouring with rain soon, so we need to do some things in between. And one of the things, as Kristen mentioned, one of the things that we face ourselves, what do we do in the meantime? What do we do? How do we create this capacity? Now, of course, the first thing, as we talked about, was onto this. We're going to hit some slides. The first thing we said was going to be Alpha. The second thing is that we're going to be talking about, want to develop next year, is a really clear discipleship pathway. See, if Alpha is actually about creating a space where people can ask questions about the big meaning of life or the big things in life and actually really get introduced to who God is, then what do we do after that, right? What do we do after that thing? You can either come to church, which was absolutely amazing. But even for many of us, we actually want to know what it means to follow Jesus. It's one thing to encounter, God on Sunday and in many ways during the week. But how do we develop that? How do we go deeper into that? And why this is really important is this, because, these moments where actually people coming to faith in quite a dramatic way and quite an accelerated way, it's not the first time it's happened in world history, right? This has happened before. And in fact, in the mid-1700s, there was a great kind of awakening, it was called, in the UK. And it was really through, a couple of people were really identified with this movement. John Wesley was one, and another person was called George Whitefield. George Whitefield was an amazing orator, really polished speaker, was absolutely phenomenal. I mean, some of the data that you see from overseas, that he went around the UK, many people got to know or encountered God through him, and he went to the United States as well, and he was speaking. This is like mid-1700s, right? 30,000 people. An amazing orator, and many people came to faith. John Wesley was actually not so much. He actually had a funny accent. He was a bit short, and he wasn't very very charismatic. But on his side, he actually thought about, well, what do people do next? And he thought about, for the people who had encountered God, he actually devised a bit of a method or a system or a pathway where if people wanted to do more things, they could. And he organized people into classes, it was called, or societies, where they learnt to, what does it mean to actually develop my life with God? How do I make more space for God in my life? How do I make space in my life through prayer? How do I make space in my life for God through reading the Bible? How do I actually get involved in doing things like prayer ministry and all these kinds of things? So he basically kind of got our equivalent of community groups together. But he kind of thought through this carefully and developed different, it's called a society or a class or a system. And it became a method that he used. This later on became this thing called the Methodists, right? Great branding. But interestingly, at the end of this kind of great awakening, George Whitefield, who was where many, many people came to faith, he said this in relation to John Wesley. He says this: "My brother Wesley acted wisely. The souls that were awakened under his ministry, he joined in societies," that means a discipleship pathway, "and thus preserved the fruit of his labor. This I neglected, and my people are a rope of sand." Many people came to faith through George Whitefield, but then what happened next? No one really knows. There was no kind of gathering in, there was no growing or tending to the little shoots that actually were rising through the surface. There was no spaces where people could continually reflect into their lives something of God's presence and goodness and learn what it means to follow Jesus. Literally, that's what it says in the Bible. This is something you learn. In the Great Commission, Jesus says to his disciples, go out into all the world, make disciples and teach them what it means to follow him. Teach them what it means to be immersed in the life of God's presence in the Spirit. So this is actually something, there's more to do than just having people becoming Christians. There's more to do than just getting hit by the wave, right, of what God's going to be doing. We actually need to think about developing some discipleship pathways. And so that's going to be a big focus for us as we launch into 2026 and something that we want to really go for and develop. So you're going to be hearing more about that. The other thing that we want to do is we want to think about leadership development. If we think about creating capacity in spaces for our children's ministry, our youth ministry, our young adults, for Alpha, for prayer ministry, all these things, right? At the end of the day, this takes more than just, hey, I'm keen. There needs to be some leadership development into those spaces. But also, if we're going to be a part of actually revitalizing other churches, the long-term game for that is we also need to be thinking on a much bigger scale in terms of leadership development also. And one of the great things about being a part of a network of churches that exists from around the world through Holy Trinity Brompton and the Alpha Network is in fact that you actually get to draw on the resources also of that network, right? So you may not know this, but Alpha is this year alone has been they've done 2 million Alpha courses between the start of the year and July, and it's been done in 146 different countries. Right? This is what we're a part of. In a not dissimilar way, when it comes to leaders and leadership development, we can actually be a part of this amazing network also. So what we have begun to do this year is that we've begun to access a theology degree through our friends in Malaysia. Right? So we can actually begin doing degree-level theological education through the St. Paul's Theological College in Malaysia. So that's one of the ways we can actually begin to think about our much bigger kind of calling into leadership development. In addition to that, we also, because we're a part of a network, we have a person who's wants to come and do a ministry placement with us next week. And her name is Bookie. She's 22. She's from Manchester. And she has been training for doing worship leading in a new church planted by HTB in 2023. And she's going to be coming to do a ministry placement with us because she feels really called to do ministry in New Zealand. Right? A church in Manchester. She's 22. She feels called to do ministry in New Zealand. So she's going to be doing her theological training through St. Paul's Theological Centre in Malaysia, and we're facilitating it through what we're doing here at St. Augustine's. And there's more of this coming down the pipe, right? Because there's other people wanting to come and train with us and be a part of what we're doing here at St. Augustine's, which is going to be absolutely fantastic. So Bookie arrives on Wednesday, and she's going to be a part of the crew. She's going to be helping Kristen in worship, and we're doing a whole lot of other things as well in terms of ministry. Now, granted, this is one person, right? One person, but it's kind of like a cloud, right, on the horizon. We've also got a ministry training thing happening in South Africa and Los Angeles that we've been a part of organising. And the goal and the dream is, in fact, that many people can be a part of this network that we can get going outside of the UK, right? Is there heaps? There's not heaps, but there is a cloud the size of a person's hand on the horizon, and this is kind of beginning to happen. So it's important for us to get on board and start thinking clearly and thinking strategically and thinking with real courage and with real faith about what God is calling us into. As I said at the start, it's a moment where we need to actually pause ourselves and think, gosh, okay, if this is what God seems like calling St. Augustine's into, what part am I in? What am I in for here? What's God calling me into? And what's God calling me into in terms of a financial response also? So I want to bring all this before you where it's exciting times, but it's times where we don't do nothing, right? It's thoughts and prayers are also welcomed, but it's also a great time for action. In the meantime, that's where action was actually taking place also. So what I want us to do right now is just pause. I want you to close your eyes and just allow God to be speaking to you. Here's the question I want for you to be asking yourselves is, Lord Jesus, this is your church. What are you doing in it? Lord Jesus, we are your people. We want to get to know you. We live by your words. What are you saying to me? How am I to respond this morning? I'm going to set a little timer because genuinely the goal here is, as the kind of leader of St. Augustine's, is that I basically set out where we feel we're going. But genuinely it's between you and the Spirit about how you respond. And so let's just take a moment. I'm going to give this Steve Jobs 30 seconds. So Lord Jesus, we want to take your church seriously. We want to take what you're doing in our lives seriously. We want to take the fact that you speak to us, you call us into a future. As we sit here now, Lord, be speaking into our hearts. Not out of what we don't have, but what we do have. As we pause now, speak to us, Holy Spirit.